using my better judgment, I turned around. We did a horseshoe over Horseshoe Dam. I come from a long line of airplane lovers. My grandfather was actually a mechanic on the small aircraft. He used to take me to this grass field in Oliver Springs, Tennessee. Look it up. It's a tiny little dot on the map. And I was his helper, if you will. I would follow behind him and wipe all the grease off the airplane. People would come by and say, "Joe," that was his name, "you're not even doing any work on the plane." He goes, "Yes, I am. There's no grease anywhere." And that's my little helper right there. There was one time where he was going to take me flying. Apparently I was terrified. And I kept saying, "No, no, 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 no." And so we never actually took off. But I spent most of my young childhood at this airport. Fast forward to the year 2002, I decided I'm going to learn how to fly. I love flying. It was fun. So I found a flight school in Knoxville, Tennessee called Island Home Airport. They had a flight training facility there. And it's just right outside the city, but it's on an island. So all around it is water. And if you take off, you're over water, no matter which direction you took off. You landing, you're coming in over water. So I worked on it and I got my pilot's license pretty quick. So the best thing that happened was I flew the airplane to the grass field and landed it in front of my grandfather. So he got to see me land an airplane at the field that I grew up on. Unfortunately, before we took the flight, he passed away, but he got to see me do that, and that was an incredible experience. The DPE for my flight license was Evelyn B. Johnson. And at one time, and she held the record for the most hours in an airplane for a female. I mean, she was 93 at the time and had close to 60,000 hours. So we sat down and did the verbal part where we just sit and bantered back and forth. And she said, "Where did you find your love of aviation?" And I'm like, "My grandfather." I said, "He works at this little field in Oliver Springs, Tennessee. And, he's a mechanic there." And she goes, "Is that Joe Cooper?" And I'm like, "Yes, it is." And she's like, "Oh, I've known him for years." Now, I flew the plane from downtown Island in Knoxville to Morristown, Tennessee to do my flight exam. So it's not like they were close, I guess close enough to know each other. Because later when I talked to my grandfather and showed him my pilot's license, he's like, "I know her. I've met her a few times." So we talked back and forth and she goes, "All right, go pre-flight the airplane and I'll be right out." Now again, she's 93 years old. She's about this tall, but she's sharp as a tack. It was crazy. And so I'm pre-flighting the airplane and she walks out carrying 3 big couch cushions. And I'm like, "What is she doing?" She set these couch cushions on the passenger side and climbed up and sat on them. I looked at her and she goes, "This is the only way I can see out of the airplane." And I'm like, "Okay." So we take off, everything's uneventful, and we're flying along. She tells me, "Fly in this direction for a little bit." And so I'm flying along and I look over and she is sound asleep. So I don't know if I bored her to tears or if my flying was just that good that she's able to sleep on the flight. She was asleep for about 5 minutes. And when she woke up, it was like nothing had happened. And she's like, "All right, there's a thunderstorm ahead. Where are you diverting to?" Now, back then, there was no ForeFlight. I had the map. And I said, "Okay, we're here. I'm going to divert over here." She goes, "Perfect." She goes, "Okay, now let's do the instrument portion of it." I'm like, "Okay." So she takes the sectional, unfolds it, and sticks it all up in the windshield so I can't see anything. And she's pulling the flap down every now and then and looking outside the airplane to make sure, we're not running into anything while it's happening. So we're flying along. I've done all these maneuvers, and she goes, let's go land and let's get you that pilot certificate. So it was really cool. We went back, we landed, and she wrote out this little card. She signed my logbook. It's one of the best signatures in my logbook. Unfortunately, again, she was 93 in 2002. She had to stop flying, I think, 2 years after that because she was in an accident and lost her leg. But eventually, she passed away. I think she was 104 years old. So she lived a very long life in aviation. And she was, like I said, sharp as a tack, incredible woman, and it was a privilege that I got to meet her. Fast forward a little bit, I've been flying for a few years. I'm thinking about getting my instrument rating, and then, as always happens, I ran out of money. Flying is not a cheap, fun thing to do. Lots of less expensive, fun things to do, so I went with those. And believe it or not, I was out of aviation for 16 years. And I saw some videos online. SoCal Flying Monkey was one. And I started following him and looking at his videos. And my wife loved his videos as well. So we started watching them together. And she's like, you should revisit your pilot's license. And I'm like, okay. So I found a guy, Chris Strivers. We went down to Chandler Airport and we went up in a 172. Again, I hadn't flown in 16 years, but at home, I've got this very super sophisticated flight sim. I mean, it's got a physical panel with all the bells and whistles, radio stack, everything. All the instruments are there. It's not just on the screen. And I've got this 60-inch screen in front of me. So I kept current just using the flight sim. So we go up, and he warned me beforehand, it's probably going to be about 16 hours because you've been out for 16 years. I said, okay, whatever it takes. We go up the first time. He's like, you haven't flown in 16 years, right? I'm like, no. He's like, you're doing great. So we flew around a while, and my first landing, nailed it, center line, right on the, it was beautiful. Probably the best landing I've ever made. Haven't made it that good since then, but it was really cool. So I did a few lessons with him, and then I found out I really wanted to get into a low wing, and found out that a coworker of mine actually had a son who owns an airplane. He's got a mechanic or AP business over at Falcon Field. So I went to Falcon Field and met Justin Winters, who is also a flight examiner. And I used a Warrior to finish out my flight training, or to get current, if you will. I remember the day we signed off, I was like, yes, that is super awesome. Then I took my wife up flying. She'd never been flying in a small airplane before. She's like, what if I'm too nervous? What if we get there and I don't want to go up? I said, then I'll do a couple of circuits in the pattern and we'll go eat. And she's like, cool. It was my first time after 16 years without an instructor. And of course, I took my wife because why not? But night before, I used my flight sim and I talked her through the checklist and showed her some of the procedures. When we got there, she said she was super comfortable. We got in the plane and she goes, I can do this. I said, good. You're my co-pilot. Here's the checklist. You're responsible for reading the checklist to me. So I gave her something to do to help keep her mind off anything, any weirdness. And it helped that in my flight sim, I have a super accurate Falcon Field airport. I mean, it's got all the markings and everything that we need. We went through the run-up, everything on the flight sim the night before, so that when we did it in real life, she was like, oh, this is easy. I'm like, yeah, for you. So we took off. We planned to actually fly up to Sedona. I checked the weather. There was no wind. Beautiful, perfect day to fly into Sedona. And we get about halfway up there over Horseshoe Dam, and I tune in the weather. And so I'm getting the weather, and at the end, an announcement comes on. Today's pilot day, so expect heavier than usual traffic in the pattern. I look at my wife and I said, I'm brand new back in the air. I can do it. I would prefer to turn around and go back and just find a restaurant and eat in Mesa, because we live up here near Scottsdale Airport. And she's like, I'm good with that. So using my better judgment, I turned around. We did a horseshoe over Horseshoe Dam and flew back to Falcon Field and had a wonderful lunch.
Hey gang, here from Hangar Talk. Thank you so much for plugging into the channel, liking, subscribing. We appreciate all you continuous subscribers, and we can't wait to see you on the next one.